but apparently news is the Negro League. There's kind of recently they have the MLB has agreed to merge the records, and there's quite a bit of differences. Sol, can you kind of talk us through some of those points?
So on Wednesday, May 29th, we got some historic news where the stats from the Negro Leagues were added to the stat books for the Major League Baseball. Players like Jackie Robinson, Willie Mays, Minnie Minosa, Satchel Paige get to have their full professional careers reflected in the record book now. But the biggest news was that of Josh Gibson. Josh Gibson only ever played in the Negro Leagues and tragically died at the age of 35 from a brain tumor. He's now the single season leader in batting average, slugging percentage, and OPS. The previous records for slugging and OPS in a season were both held by Barry Bonds. Also, Gibson's career batting average passes Ty Cobb for the all-time lead, while his career slugging percentage and OPS take over the previous leader in both categories, which was Babe Ruth.
And we do. I'm sorry. We do have some graphics. We'll go ahead and show just for some visual aids.
Yeah.
And if you see there anything that's in that yellow gold, those are Negro League players that are now being reflected in the stat book, in the record book. One important note to add for anyone who's ever visited the Baseball Hall of Fame, his plaque says he hit almost 800 homers in league and independent ball. The committee involved with adding these stats did not include anecdotal evidence, which many of those home runs coming outside of what was deemed league play and wasn't accompanied by box scores. So while Gibson will have several of his accomplishments now counted as MLB records, he will not be the league leader in career home runs. So how do you guys feel about these stats finally being added?
Yeah, Josh, go ahead.
It's about time. I mean, it's not. It's unfortunate that it happened when it happened and that the way it happened, but they're all coming together. It's what kind of we want it to be. Now, granted, obviously, there's unfortunately going to be, for the baseball purist out there is going to be those people that still look at it with an asterisk because they never actually played against each other. But guess what? It wasn't their fault on it with the prejudice that happened. Everyone wanted to play in the majors, in quote unquote. They just weren't allowed because of prejudice. Nothing else about their talent. Of course, I mean there was, and the only reason they weren't in there is because of their prejudice. So for the baseball purists out there, unfortunately, we'll never know. All we can know is the stats are the stats, and they're still crazy with 800 home runs and stuff like that. But it's biggest like no duh. Why does it take us all the way to 2024 to make this happen?
Yeah, well, you got to have the old hands change. I mean, you got to have the old money or the old guard basically kind of pass on, and then that way you kind of get innovative thinking. I mean, for me, whenever I first saw this, I was kind of like, why? I mean, I can kind of see, not that the Negro Leagues didn't deserve, to be on the same field, but it's just two different leagues. But I love it though, because coming from Kansas City, we actually had the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum there.
Yeah.
And got to visit there several times. And there was, whenever I was younger, there were still some surviving players, that were, always at the Royals games and always in the media and really promoting it and pushing it. And so for those individuals, I cannot be happier for, because it's something they've been battling their whole life. Of not having a seat at the table, but then also, I mean, as we can see, there's clearly a good amount of yellow,
right?
It's like, yeah, like they've been competitive this whole time, and just as much and more so. And I mean, you got Babe Ruth, you got Ted Williams, you got Lou Gehrig, so you got people that deserve to be in the mix. But then Josh Gibson, I mean, he's really the one that takes the show and takes much of this yellow cake, really, as far as the color code there, being in the top 3 and everything, but really being the top 1 and 3 out of 4. So it's awesome. But I will jump out to our chat real quick. We got Jeremy Miller watching. What's up, bud? So it's a diverse group of sports panelists. Yeah, that's right. But yeah, he also says the MLB the show had a mode before MLB actually added the stats. Glad it finally transferred over. That's cool. Okay, so the MLB the show is the video game. Same league produced Hall of Fames. I don't know why anyone doubts they couldn't play in the majors. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was funny watching this on McAfee and him trying so hard not to say the word, even though a black panelist said he could.
Well, he ended up screwing up today for another reason, so we'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah, we'll get into that later.
It's funny you bring up McAfee, but we're not transitioning to there yet.
All right, hey, settle down, you white bitch. All right. Didn't mean to spoil it, but hey, you know what? Hey, Josh, hey, why don't you get a? I gotta do it when we get back to the threes. Hey, Josh, hey, get a little color on yourself, buddy. Why don't you match me yourself? Oh, I'm just messing with you, buddy.
Being abused.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, anything else, as far as the Negro Leagues, Sol, I mean, thank you so much for presenting this, by the way, and bring this to our attention.
I'm just happy that these are finally being added. People talk about the first few decades of MLB and names like Babe Ruth, and the one thing people always talk about goes, he never had to hit a homer off of a black pitcher or a Dominican pitcher. So kind of it's always been the joke on would he have been as prolific if he was playing against all spectrums and not just white people. So I'm just happy that these people are finally getting their flowers. It's long overdue. I'm glad they're in the record book.
Yeah. And if people have an issue with it, they can go through the numbers themselves and separate it and keep it on 2 different pages. But for the rest of us, we're putting it together.
It's a tiny argument of the fact that they didn't play each other. And the thing is yes, another 2 different leagues, but it's not because one was worse than the other. It's all because of prejudice. So
yeah. Well, and speaking of playing against each other, it's more in football, which you don't really have. But there was a Native American team that actually played, I believe, the New York Giants or the Jets, and whooped them. And because it was one of those exhibition games that they're like, oh, we'll go down there in Oklahoma, just kick the shit out of some natives. And they ended up getting whooped, and they're like, you know what? Let's stay out of Oklahoma and let's keep Native Americans out of our sports.
That's why Alabama integrated, because Bear Bryant played USC, got the shit beat out of him in 1972, and they're like, let's rearrange this. Like,
you know what? These people give us a competitive advantage.
Yeah,
Well, people give you a competitive advantage.